Welcome back to Satan's Trilogy, Book 1, Chapter 6, and this will be reading 53, and perhaps the end of the book. We'll see how far we can go. I am the author and the narrator. Relax, sit back, and enjoy. Grandma, this is Esther. She has just arrived from China and is in many of my classes. Esther is my dearest friend. Raven quickly turned to Day. And this is Day. We met this summer at her father's grocery store. Day is in many of my classes, and she, too, is my dearest friend. Raven stopped talking and was beaming with pride, having introduced the closest friends she had ever had to her grandmother. Raven's grandmother was in a battery-powered wheelchair positioned in front of a table where she had finished her breakfast. She was thin, looking slightly frail. At one time she had been fairly tall, but now her age had reduced her to a much shorter woman that was nearly overwhelmed by the wheelchair. She had her hand on the remote controls, turning the chair towards the girls so she could face them directly. Studying Esther and Day for only a moment, the old lady smiled, then reached for her glasses at the table. You two look so attractive. I need my glasses to tell me if my eyes are deceiving me. The old lady fiddled with her glasses until Raven decided to help her position them on her head. Again, the old lady studied Esther and Day for a moment. I always thought Raven was the most beautiful girl that I had ever seen, but you two are equally as beautiful. She continued to study Esther and Day. I don't say that to flatter you, and I am not talking about your looks, although you are both attractive. I can tell you are both beautiful from within. I can understand why the three of you are best friends. What a wonderful thing. Riley Grace softly spoke to her grandmother. Grandmother, they are my best friends too. Riley Grace didn't say another word. She didn't like to overwhelm her grandmother with a lot of talking. The old lady looked at Riley Grace for a moment. Well then, this is very, very special. 4 is a lucky number, and you 4 are blessed with happiness. The old lady seemed very relaxed with what she had just said and continued to speak. As a young girl in Norway, I too had 3 best friends. They have always been in my heart, even though we haven't seen each other for many years. When I came to this country, I was so lonely. I met your grandfather and fell in love almost instantly. He was so charming and like you girls. He had such a beautiful spirit. Esther hesitated, but said to Raven's grandmother, My mother was from Norway. She died when I was born, so I never knew her. My dad always told me that her hair was the color of Norwegian snow, and her complexion was icy white. He loved her very much. Raven's grandmother quickly softened her voice and said to Esther, I know that your mom is proud of you. What a wonderful young woman you have become. Quickly, Raven's grandmother said, I am tired. Will you help me to bed? I should take a nap. I had trouble sleeping last night. I never sleep well when my granddaughters are gone. It was uncertain who she was talking to, but Esther immediately grabbed the back of her wheelchair and took her to her bed. Raven helped her from the chair as Esther pulled the sheets back as the old lady cradled herself onto the mattress. Raven pulled the sheets up and kissed her grandmother on the cheek. "Please wake me in a few hours. I want to have a supper tonight. The cook is preparing something special for me. Red snapper. I love red snapper." As the girls left the room, the old lady called to Esther. Speaking in Norwegian, she said something. Esther smiled and softly said back in Norwegian a couple sentences to Raven's grandmother. The old lady heard Esther, smiled, and fell asleep, all in the wink of an eye. Raven stood in the hallway and said to Esther, "You speak Norwegian?" Esther smiled softly, then responded, "My Norwegian, I am afraid, is very poor. I wanted to learn my mother's native language so bad that I convinced my father to give me a tutor, but I have never been to Norway, and I am afraid my dialect is very poor." Esther looked at Raven, then added, "I know the words, but I don't know the language. Do you know what I mean?" "Sure," said Raven as they all walked back down the stairs to the lower level. Raven asked, "Hope you don't mind my asking, but what did my grandmother say to you?" Esther reached out and pulled Raven close to her. "She said it would be nice if I came back for another visit. I told her she was today's wonderful surprise and that I will ask her to tell me about Norway when I return." Esther smiled at Raven. "You know, it is such a small world. Your grandmother and my mother are both from Norway. We might be distant cousins or something." Riley, Grace, and Day were walking behind Esther and Raven. Riley Grace looked at Day as if saying, "We might be cousins." Day giggled. "Esther's right. We might all be second or third cousins. It's entirely possible." The four girls practically skipped down the long stairs to the lower level and entered the large reception room. There was a large fireplace on the far wall and two long combination sofas facing each other with a long rectangular coffee table between them. Esther and Raven sat on the sofa to the left, while Riley, Grace, and Raven sat on the sofa to the right. Esther felt very comfortable and leaned back into the overstuffed cushion. "This has been a wonderful surprise. I love your grandmother. She has such a large home. Have the two of you adjusted to living here?" Esther asked and then waited for a response. Raven thought for a moment. "You know, grandmother is great, and I love her dearly. She alone makes the move worthwhile. But this move has brought a whole new group of friends into my life, and I absolutely love that." Raven leaned back into a sofa cushion as she finished talking. Riley Grace quickly added, "I'll second that." Everyone looked at Riley Grace and then giggled. She was so cute, and yet they all felt she belonged in the group. Esther spoke first. "Riley Grace, I love you, and I agree. It seems that our meeting was destiny." A sudden sound of very old classical music was heard. It was a ringtone on Raven's cell phone. "That's Dad," said Raven. "Excuse me for a minute." "Hi, Dad," Raven said, listening to her phone. Raven listened for a few moments and then said, "Okay, we'll see you tomorrow then." Raven ended the call and looked to Riley Grace. "Dad has got to work for a long while. We'll see him tomorrow," he says. Day was feeling their disappointment and looked to Esther. Esther, too, was concerned. Day decided to make a suggestion. "You know what you can do? If you both are now free for the day, why don't you come to the store with Esther and me? I'll show all three of you how to keep the shelves stocked." "Oh my gosh," said Riley Grace, "a real job? I would love to learn about working in a grocery store." Raven looked at Riley Grace and saw the enthusiasm on her face. So she decided to agree. "Well, then it is settled. You'll all learn the grocery business today." Riley Grace had the biggest smile on her face, and Esther couldn't help but feel an abundance of pride in her sister's decision to make Raven's and Riley Grace's day special. Esther took the motorcycle home and then jumped into the Mustang as Day moved from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. Raven and Riley Grace were sitting in the back. "We are right on schedule. Our dad is expecting us at 9, and we will be on time, with 2 additional workers." Esther smiled as she turned into the parking lot for the grocery store. All 4 girls quickly walked into the store and stood in front of Mr. Ho. Esther smiled at her father and started to explain. "The 2 friends beside me..." But they interrupted and quickly said, "Father, we have 2 more hard-working sisters that will join our team. This is Raven. You have seen her before. And this is Riley Grace. She wants to become a great chef someday." Riley Grace was smiling at Mr. Ho and excited to start her new job. Mr. Ho looked at the 4 girls, smiled, and said, "Riley Grace, how many languages do you speak?" Riley Grace gave a large smile to Mr. Ho, then answered, "I speak Spanish, French, and English. I am studying Chinese." Riley Grace kept smiling at Mr. Ho almost as if she was looking at a superstar. Mr. Ho smiled at Riley Grace and said, "That is very good." Then he turned to Raven. Smiling, he asked, "And what about you? What languages do you speak?" Quickly, Raven answered, "Our father is French. That is why we both speak French. It is his wish that we both learn to speak French." Raven paused and added, "Of course I speak Spanish too. Half of the people I know speak Spanish. I like to share their language and, of course, to know what they are saying." Mr. Ho studied the girls. "This is good. I need hard-working help, and we have many customers that speak foreign languages. It is good to speak more than one language." Giving a big smile, Mr. Ho said, "All right, I know that your enthusiasm will translate into until you're working hard." Mr. Ho smiled at the 4 girls. "All right, we now have 4 girls working here. You need to train them. That is your job." Mr. Ho smiled at Day and then helped the customer ready to make their purchases. Day turned to everyone and started to jump up and down. "All right, we are co-workers. Let's go to the back room. That's where it all starts." After their group hug, they all followed Day to the back room. The strong smell of fresh vegetables and wooden crates filled the air. Day explained where the different foods came from and how the seasons differ in delivery. Farmers brought their vegetables during the summer months, and during the winter months they purchased from a wholesale market along the South Shore line. In addition, several wholesale companies sent salesmen to the store once a week and took orders. The back room was organized so that everything was arranged to facilitate FIFO, first in, first out. That is, first in, first out. Day explained everything clearly, and all three girls followed her explanation of the store's operations without asking a single question. Day took them into the store and explained the pricing process and the correct rotation of inventory to prevent anything from becoming outdated. She then identified and discussed the nearly 60 different vegetables and fruit that were offered for sale, some being seasonal and not presently available. Day had a wealth of knowledge on food, having grown up in the grocery store business. Fortunately, all three students were very bright, quick learners, and sharp intellects. Day saw that everyone had quickly grasped the entire operation during the first discussion and was very pleased. She knew her father, too, would be pleased. After only 2 hours of stocking shelves and straightening the various displays, the girls were finished. Day was pleased with her co-workers. "We have nothing more to do," said Day. "The work is complete. We have completed what would usually take me a full day. You are all fast learners, and I am pleased." The four girls walked up to the front register where Day's father was standing. He quickly commented, "I am pleased. You are all hard workers and have learned your jobs very fast. The store looks great and will not need additional attention until tonight at 6 o'clock. We'll need to refresh our shelves at that time. I'll have Day and Esther come back at 6. Riley, Grace, and Raven, here are questionnaires that I need you to fill out. Please tell me the hours that both of you are able to work. That way, I can rotate the two of you with Day and Esther. At this time, I will not need four workers at once." Raven and Riley Grace filled out the questionnaire, and then the four girls walked to the car, after thanking Mr. Ho for hiring them. At the car, Raven checked her phone. There was a message from her father. It was now free, and he wanted to treat his girls to a dinner out. Raven immediately perked up and said to Riley Grace, "Dad wants to take us out to dinner tonight." Raven watched Riley Grace for a response. Riley Grace quickly said, "Then it's good that Esther and Day are working tonight and not us. Where do you think he'll want to take us?" Raven laughed. "With Dad, it's hard to say. Sometimes his idea of eating out is McDonald's or Taco Bell, and other times it's a very nice restaurant. Maybe he'll give us a choice." Esther spoke up. "Well, let's get you home so that you can find out. It sounds like your father works long hours on his job, and you don't want to miss this opportunity." Esther was trying to remain positive on what she viewed as a less than favorable relationship. Esther started the car, and as it roared back to life, she took off with some force, pushing everyone back into their seats. "Sorry," said Esther. "I am still getting used to the accelerator. My cousins managed to add some horsepower beyond the original specs. They surprised me with adding some really nice features. It's good to have family." Esther started to relax behind the wheel as she drove through the city. Having dropped Raven and Riley Grace off at their home, Esther turned to Day and made a suggestion. "I have a friend. I met him on my first day here. I would like to visit him today. I would be proud to introduce my sister to him." Day smiled at Esther as she was driving, watching how Esther maneuvered in traffic. "Esther, I would be honored to meet your friend. Where does he live?" Day asked. "That is wonderful. He has just moved in with his brother. His wife died recently, and his brother wants them to share their final years. I think it's good for both of them. Esther quickly pulled into the entrance of a very large home. The gate at the entrance was open, and this concerned Esther. As Esther parked the car in front of the house and behind a large black Hummer, Esther turned to Day and became very serious. "Sister, I'm afraid that I might have placed you in a dangerous situation. I know that you have great intellect, but I am trained in combat and you are not. I fear my friends might be in trouble. You can drive my car from this spot, and I will call you within an hour, or you can go inside with me. If you go inside, you must not move or react to anything unless I tell you to." As Esther spoke, she pulled a bundle of knives from the center console, then concealed them under her sleeve. Esther waited a moment for Day's response. "I'll never walk away from my sister. I can control my actions. Let's go in," responded Day as she opened the passenger door. Walking up to the Hummer, Esther ran her hand over the car. As she walked along the car, she glanced inside, trying to determine how many people arrived in the car. One thing for sure, they hadn't been there too long. The hood was very warm. They walked up 6 marble steps to the grand entrance of the large mansion. Esther stood at the front entrance and rang the bell. The door opened, and a male, dressed in black, stood at the entrance and asked, "May I help you?" He was at least 6 feet tall, with oily black hair parted at one side and a pencil-thin mustache. "Hi, my name is Esther Saint, and this is my sister Day. I am a good friend of Axel, and we are here to visit him." Esther gave one of her big, innocent smiles. He looked at Esther and Day, studying them for a moment, then said, "Please come in." A man led the 2 girls through the open foyer and into a great room where Axel and his brother Otto were seated at a large table. Several papers were in front of them, and behind them stood another man in a black suit. He was slightly less than 6 feet tall, but more muscular than the first, and Esther could tell he was carrying a gun on his side. Esther smiled at Axel and quickly went to him. Axel stood and hugged Esther. "It is so good to see you again, and who is this?" Axel was smiling at Day. "This is my sister Day. I told her that I needed to visit a good friend, and she wanted to meet you." Turning to Day, Esther smiled and said, "Day, I want you to meet Axel Bueller. Axel and I met on our first day in Chicago. We have a lot in common, including a love of German food." Esther laughed and hugged Axel. Day started to speak, but before she could utter a word, Axel was giving her a big hug and looking her straight in the face. "Day, it is wonderful to meet you. Esther is very special to me, and I am honored that her sister has wanted to meet me. I am so happy that Esther brought family to meet me." Axel did not seem bothered by the fact Day was of obvious Korean descent, and Esther was not. He wanted Day and Esther's sister without question. He accepted Day as Esther's sister without question. "Day, this is Axel's brother Otto. A more loyal brother does not exist. I consider Otto a very good friend," said Esther. Otto stood, held his hand out to Day. He was formal, but for Otto, this was a real extension of acceptance. Day took his hand and smiled and said, "My sister picks her friends wisely. I am very pleased to meet you." At that moment, the stranger that had opened the door spoke up. "All right, if we can complete this business, I'll be on my way, and you can continue your visit after we leave." Esther looked at the man and then Axel and Otto. Speaking German, Esther asked Otto, Otto, do we have a problem here? Otto looked at Esther. Her face was solemn, and Otto could see her determination. Otto understood that Esther was a very capable young woman. She had disarmed his bodyguard weeks earlier to gain entrance to Axel's hospital room. Otto decided to explain the situation to Esther, and in German he spoke. These two men arrived unexpectedly. They have asked me to sell my shares of W.O.W. stock to them. They have been rather insistent. Esther turned to the unwelcome guest and smiled, then asked Otto in German, "And are they offering a fair price?" Otto quickly responded, "Yes, they are offering twice the market value." Esther quickly considered the fact, then said to Otto, in German, "I understand that these men have offended you, but perhaps it is best for two brothers in retirement to avoid a possible conflict. Why don't we offer to sell this stock at 6 times the street value, and if they refuse, I'll tell them you will sell me the stock and I will never sell." Otto smiled, speaking in English. Otto turned to the impatient intruder and told him, "This young lady will explain our counter-offer to you." Day had sat in a chair positioned against the wall alongside a large and ornate grandfather clock. Esther was still at the table's side, and the second intruder had moved closer to her. Esther turned to the first man that had opened the door for them. Smiling, Esther quickly changed her expression to a somber one. It seems that Otto prefers to avoid any conflict, so he has agreed to sell the stock for 6 times market value. "That is ridiculous. What makes you think we'd pay that amount?" He seemed agitated, and his friend drew closer to Esther. "You either agree to pay 6 times the market value, or I will make that offer to Otto. If he sells to me, I will never sell the stock." Esther stood tall and alert. The man looked to his accomplice, then nodded his head. Esther felt the second man making a threatening move to her, and she quickly turned, grabbing the man's outreached arm and raising it above his shoulder as she landed a bone-crushing blow to the man's rib cage. The expression on his face was of tremendous surprise and then pain as he fell to his knees. Esther had already removed the gun from his waist, concealing it in the small of her back. Looking across the table at the first man, straight into his eyes, Esther said, "I am very disappointed in you. We offered a friendly solution, and you have 60 seconds to accept our offer, or you may leave." Esther stood tall and committed. The man in black looked at Esther. "That was amazing." "I will pay your price." He walked to the table, wrote down on the document the new figures, and initiated them. He asked Otto to sign the document in 2 places, then removed the top copy for Otto. "Otto Buller, you have a very amazing friend. Our business is done. Tomorrow, my attorney will contact you with a check and finalize the purchase. Congratulations, you have made a small fortune with your investment." The man turned and helped his companion to his feet, and they left. As the 2 men left the room, Esther turned to Axel and Otto, asking, "Do I smell sausage?" Axel laughed. "Yes." He laughed. "Please, will you and Day join us?" Esther turned to Day. "Day, there are few meals that I enjoy more than a German meal with sausage." Day laughed. "Sounds wonderful. We have plenty of time." "And what about those men?" asked Axel Buller. "The one that talked, he is very intelligent, and he got what he wanted. We have avoided a confrontation, and I think that is good." Esther replied. All's well that ends well, Esther said, and everyone laughed. Buller moved to Esther and gave her a hug. I agree. Nothing is better than German sausage. Suddenly, all four laughed as they went to the kitchen. All right. That is the end of book 1. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, when I start reading book 2 of Satan's Trilogy, please take care and be safe. Thank you for listening.